Many of you already know that within the very first few minutes of sitting down with a new client, solution-focused practitioners ask their clients the best hopes question. So, what are your best hopes from our talking together? Indeed, on occasions, I have seen my colleagues at Brief in London starting to ask the question before they have sat down. As they're walking across to their chair, they'll start, so what are your best hopes from our talking together? And when I've challenged them over that, saying, how can you do that? They'll answer by saying, we don't have the right to waste our clients' time. Clients' time is precious. So, very early on, we'll ask that question. And look, I have to admit that I'll sometimes pause after the question and ask a second question. How will you know that our talking together has ended up being of use to you? But whether I ask the follow-up question or not, one way or another, most clients answer. Now, this is an unusual way to start a therapeutic session, to start a therapeutic engagement. Indeed, at times, observers, either watching a session live or watching a recording of a session, are shocked. People will say, I don't think that my clients would like that. Or I wouldn't like that if I were the client. But when I invite them to watch the client on the tape, their response, they typically see someone going along with the process, seemingly happy with it. And the thought that occurs to me at times is that maybe clients are more flexible than us therapists. But the question that's interesting is, why do we do it? And what are we up to? Now, obviously, one part of that answer is that we don't have the right to waste the client's time. But what's going on that stops us wasting time? And the answer to the question, I suppose, why do we do it, is because we have to do it. The solution-focused approach is non-normative. We have no views on how people should live their lives, on what a healthy life looks like. Indeed, we have no concept of a healthy life. Very often, I have no information about what the problem that brought the client to the service may be. It's always easier to work with people when we don't know things about them that they don't know we know. And so at Brief, we ask for no information about clients. So clients arrive, we don't know what's brought them, and indeed we have no view on how they should be living their life. So we have to find a way of beginning to talk. And as Harry Corman, our friend, colleague in Malmö, Sweden, puts it, until you know what the client wants, you have no questions to ask. So we ask the question because we have to ask it. Now, another slightly different angle on why we ask the question is that what we're doing is establishing the legitimacy of our questions. Bill O'Hanlon, another friend and colleague, I remember Bill saying on many occasions that we don't have the right to go sightseeing in our clients' lives. And goodness, isn't that a horrific thought? The idea that we're going sightseeing in our clients' lives. So how do we ensure that we're not going sightseeing? And the only way that we can ensure it is if every question we ask can be directly related to what the client wants. So knowing what the client wants, their best hopes, is a way of establishing legitimacy. But the more interesting question, perhaps, is what is the status of the client's answer to the question? When we ask people what their best hopes are and they answer, what is their answer? Now, very often when people come across something new, what they typically do is try to fit the new into the old so that it makes sense at some level, so that it can be compartmentalized, so that it can be put in its box. That's what's going on. So sometimes when people look at solution focus, they'll say to me, I know what you're doing. Solution focus is all about being positive, isn't it? Somewhere in their lives, they've come across positive thinking. And so they fit solution focus into that pre-established frame and say, it's all about being positive. And I'll respond sometimes slightly testily, because I hate the word positive, that no, solution focus has nothing to do with being positive, and it's got everything to do with being solution focused. Or people will say, I can see what you're doing in solution focus. It's all about building self-esteem, the client's self-esteem. I say, no, it's got nothing to do with building self-esteem. But when people watch us asking the best hopes question, sometimes what they say is, okay, so this is where you're establishing the goals for the work. But are we? Is that what we're doing? Look, there was a time when the solution-focused world might well have agreed that the answer to the best hopes question was something to do with goals. Indeed, the word goals, as in the phrase well-formed goals, turned up a great deal in the earlier writings in solution focus, in Steve DeShaze's work, in Sue Kim Berg's work, in Yvonne Dolan's work. All of them wrote about well-formed goals. But was it really that simple? And what was interesting was that in one of his very early books, look, his first solution-focused book, in fact, Keys to Solution-Free Brief Therapy, that Steve DeShazer published in 1985, Steve throws a really huge and enormous spanner into the goals works idea. And almost it seemed like he wrote this without realizing what he was writing. And what he wrote was this: anything that prompts the client to say that things are better needs to be identified as verification of change, and anything that is new or different or more effective that the client reports needs to be encouraged or amplified. Let me just read that again because I think it's important. Anything that prompts the client to say that things are better needs to be identified as verification of change, and anything that is new or different or more effective that the client reports needs to be encouraged or amplified. And obviously, the key word, well, he says it twice, but the key word in there that I would want to highlight is the word anything. So Steve is not saying that it is only bits, if you want to put it that way, of the best hopes happening, or bits of the goal happening, that can be used as verification of change, but anything that is new or different or more effective. And of course, we've long known this, even if we didn't know we knew. Because at the beginning of follow-up sessions, we don't ask people what's better in relation to your best hopes, the ones you mentioned in the first session. We just ask, so what's been better? And following Steve DeShazer, we will amplify anything that the client mentions that is, to quote Steve, new or different or more effective. So at that point, what I think we're doing is co-constructing a story or a narrative of change and difference. And what we observe over and over is that as people begin to describe themselves as in a process of change, then all sorts of other changes seem to be more likely to emerge. So solution-focused practitioners, look, we aren't picky about which changes or what changes the client notices. We will accept any change, whether or not it fits with the best hopes, and we'll work with it. We'll accept it with gratitude and invite the client through our questions to amplify it. So how does this fit with the word, the concept of goals? And the answer is that I don't think it does really. The word goals, I think, implies a certain, well, certainly clarity, but perhaps also an element of rigidity. When we talk about goals, we think about establishing the goals for the work in the first session, and then the work is involved with working towards those goals, and when people have achieved their goals, we close the case. They say goodbye, we say goodbye, we finish. So the goals are fixed, and the process of the work is working towards those fixed goals. And we can see that this idea of rigidity isn't just a little bias of mine, perhaps, but it's an idea that many other people share, because often in a first session, or in a therapeutic course, or during the course of a therapeutic course, people say something on the lines of, but how do you deal with it when people change their goals? So changing goals is seen as a problem. They're meant to be fixed in the first session, and then they stay the same, we work towards it. And if people change their goals, then that's a problem to be dealt with. So I don't think that in the solution focus, we're dealing with goals. Neither would I happily accept the word contract, that we're establishing a contract, something that must be delivered. Because in my view, who knows what the client will end up accepting as a verification, to follow Steve, of satisfactory change. And if we establish and fix the only things, the goals, the only things that are allowed to verify satisfactory change in a first session, then that closes down the range of possibilities open to the client. It closes down the client's flexibility in working towards change. So I think when people are answering the best hopes question, what they're doing is giving us a starting point for a therapeutic conversation. The answer to the best hopes question is not, in my view, contractual. It is merely directional. It is something that allows us to structure the conversation that we have. And curiously, the vaguer the best hopes, the wider the range of doings and noticings that fit within the frame of the client's best hopes. So if a client were to come and say, what are your best hopes from our talking together? How do you know this has been useful? And the client were to say, well, I feel very lonely. I guess I'd be in a relationship. Now, that's very clear and very specific and very verifiable, specifically verifiable. But solution focus would make it broader. We would tend to ask the person, so if you were in a relationship, what difference are you hoping that that would make to your life? And the person will very often say, well, look, I'd be happier. I might be feeling a bit more confident. I'd be more content with the way my life was going. And a focus of the work for me would be happier, content, confident, rather than specifically tying the work to being in a relationship or not. So the best hopes give us a starting point, but they don't establish what the ending point of the work is likely or has to be.